A day out from the first scrimmage of the spring, we're answering the biggest questions facing Joey McGuire and Texas Tech football coming up on this episode of Locked On Texas Tech.
Are Locked On Texas Tech, your daily podcast on the Texas Tech Red Raiders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Texas Tech, a member of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Be sure that you have subscribed to our channel if you have not already. I'm Ryan Mainville. I cover Texas Tech for the Dallas Morning News, and I'm joined by Emery Lida, a longtime Texas Tech analyst, writer, and podcaster. Today, we are finally headed to the turf and talking a little bit of football. Man, it has been months since we talked football, and the episode that we did about Joey McGuire and his recruiting class is to this day one of our best performing episodes. So we know you guys are hungry for spring football talk, and we're excited to get into it today. No better position group or any other question to lead off with than the debate around QB1 right now. So I think that there's really three different positions at this point that you could land on this position group. I think a lot of people look at the experience of Donovan Smith and how he stepped up last season and are pointing to him as the guy, especially after, he sticks around after his dad leaves the Texas Tech coaching staff and goes and coaches for the Giants. Then you got another camp that sees the experience and the veteran presence of Tyler Shough. He's got a good deep ball. And they want him to get more reps and a larger sample size than the 4 games that he played last season before he broke his collarbone. And then, of course, you have the loyal to a fault Behren Morton camp that will just continue to call for this guy to be the leader in the nation in passing attempts until we see otherwise. And so, Emory, it's a big question. This is a big position group, obviously, for Texas Tech fans, but for every school in the country right now. Shed some light on what you think about each of these perspectives and where you might land.
Well, there's no outright wrong perspective. I think that's the first thing to really sort of hammer home here is each of the three potential quarterbacks have their own strengths. Obviously, first off, you've got the crowd that loves Behren Morton, and I think there's good reasons. Obviously, his arm strength is really good for someone of his size and stature, and kind of is maybe a little bit deceptive. He's got good mobility. Obviously, he's shown really good improbability at the high school level. Obviously, the level of competition wasn't quite what you would necessarily want to see it against, but still, I mean, he's got that sort of it factor to him. And so there's reason to really sort of buy in on Behren Morton, but we just haven't seen that in game. So I think if we're looking at just hypotheticals on who's most likely to start, I mean, you can't really say a ton about Morton until we start getting some more live scrimmage looks and sort of hear more about that. And I think eventually there will come a time where we have more of a sample on what Morton can do. But right now we're not quite there. But obviously the natural talent would indicate that he's a viable option. Then you've got Donovan Smith, who really showed out at the end of last year. And I think you take away the Oklahoma State game, which is granted a big hypothetical, or it's a big asterisk around it, like taking away easily his worst game of the year. That's not something that you should be doing. But outside of that, every other start that he made, I think you can make a good argument that he was a pretty big positive for Tech. And obviously the running ability is what really stands out with Donovan Smith, as well as the natural arm talent this year. The deep ball ability, obviously the accuracy probably isn't quite there yet, but still his arm talent is unmatched in my opinion. And that's something that he can really bring to the table. And certainly, I mean, the recent performances, the recency bias would tend to favor Donovan Smith because of what he did against Mississippi State, what he did against Iowa State, even what he did against Baylor. All of those were impressive performances. And then you've got Tyler Shough, who for a lot of last season I felt was kind of the forgotten man. Obviously, you had the season-ending injury against Texas. The start of the season, I think it was kind of in the in-between where he had good stats to start the season, had a really good game against FIU. But then aside from that, he was kind of didn't really stand out good or bad. I mean, certainly he had a rough game on paper against Stephen F. Austin, but I feel like if you watch the tape, that was as much down to schematic stuff as anything. And certainly Shough is probably the most composed guy at this point in terms of his body of work, what we've seen at the college level, the fact that he's been accurate at all three levels at various points during his college career. But again, none of these guys have a major sample size. Like Shough only played in 4 games last year. Really only had one game where he had a lot of passing attempts. Obviously got injured against Texas, Houston, and to a lesser degree Stephen F. Austin. You really relied on sort of your ground game and kind of winning in the margins and that to be able to sort of utilize your offense. So I think there's a lot going for Shough that maybe you don't really have that experience. But as of now, I mean, if I had to give an answer on the quarterback, I would go for, I mean, I've been really high on the Donovan Smith train, but I think until proven otherwise, you have to look at Tyler Shough as the favorite just because of what he came into Tech with, the pedigree he had from Oregon, the fact that he's looked pretty good in his starts against against good competition, and the fact that his first 4 games at Tech, they weren't great, but they were good enough. And I mean, in Zach Kittley's system, he has the arm to be able to do really anything you want him to do on the field. I think the accuracy is good as well.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you, and it doesn't feel totally right. I think like I'm pretty high on Donovan Smith as well. I gave him a ton of love on the award show that we did, probably to a fault. But I think right now, as it stands, you've got to kind of wipe the slate clean with Tyler Shough and just trust in his natural ability, because last season I think it was clear that he didn't feel really comfortable, and that the offensive system was just a little strange to him, if that makes sense. Like watching him play last season, what I remember most, and I haven't watched football tape in a while, is he like out of his, I think he threw 3 interceptions last year, and I think 2 of them were just complete projections to the sideline on like a bubble screen where he just did not make any other read. And it's clear that like that was the call, and that was really the only receiver that he was looking at. And so I think that a new system is going to be really, really refreshing for him, and especially with an offensive guru like Zach Kittley, that's going to give him the freedom to kind of go through his progressions and make the right read. But nonetheless, I feel like we're in a position with this staff, at least from what I know about Zach Kittley and what I think I know about Joey McGuire as a football coach, that between these two, I don't think that there's a wrong decision. And last year, to be quite frank, I think that Texas Tech made the wrong decision whenever they put Henry Colombi back at quarterback instead of Donovan Smith. And I just don't think that that's going to happen again with this staff. I think that there's a clean slate, and I think that this is going to be really, really good, not only for Shough and Smith, regardless of who ends up as QB1, but also for this team as a whole.
Yeah, real quick on Columbia, I feel like I kind of threw a lot of harshness towards his way on Twitter and really any sort of football coverage I've done the last couple of years. And I do think that there was reason for the staff at the time to bring Columbia in. Certainly, he had a really good second half against Texas after Shough went down, and he had a decent game against West Virginia, but I think the wheels just really fell off the cliff for him. And I mean, I think they were late pulling him. I agree with you. I think that the season could have been better if you had sort of optimized Donovan Smith and brought him in earlier as a bigger point of the offense. But going on to this season, I mean, I'm with you. I trust what Zach Kittley does. I trust what Joey McGuire does. And really, you've got 3 naturally talented quarterbacks. I think it's going to be either Smith or Shough, one way or the other. I can't see Morton winning the job, and feel free to burn me on that. But certainly, like, those two have proven that they've had some level of college success. And I think the system, you would say, maybe favors Shough's ability a little bit more, but it's not as much as clear cut as what some people are saying. Like Donovan Smith, his game against Iowa State had some really good throws in both the intermediate and the short window, which I think in order to fully open up the offense, you're going to need to be able to do that. And so, I mean, I think Shough and Smith, either way you could go well. Certainly Shough's had the natural ability. He's had that since he was in high school. And we've seen with Donovan Smith, just the raw talent that he had, those on display at the end of last year. So, I mean, both of the guys come in with Big 12 experience. They come in with natural talent that probably exceeds what their stats have shown so far. And either way, I feel fairly comfortable at the quarterback position. I think that certainly there have been years in the past where you felt like you were trying to decide between 2, like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10 options. I don't think that's the case here. This isn't a 2018 situation where you were choosing between McLean Carter, Jet Duffy, and Alan Bowman, and the latter two would combine for like 20 snaps in college. Like, you're coming in with established quarterbacks, with guys with a lot of natural talent and guys that hopefully should be able to pick up the offense pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a win-win situation regardless. You've got 2 young quarterbacks, really, in Morton and Smith. Smith, obviously, with a little bit more of a track record because he's had more snaps than Morton. And then you've got Shough, who's veteran and who brings that experienced mindset to the team. But a
Chuck's
good,
still not even that old either.
yeah, I mean, it's a good scenario for your football team to be in and for your roster as a whole, not only this season but going forward. But you've got to take a look at the rest of the offense. But first, a quick word from Built Bar. This is the time of year that I've pretty much given up on all my New Year's resolutions, but not this year. I'm sticking to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar. It almost feels like it's not a resolution because I actually enjoy eating Built Bar products. They're not just a protein bar, they're a treat, and they're covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in calorie, high in protein. Replace your candy bars with these, they are better. Go to Built.com and scroll down the macros chart, you'll be blown away. They're high in protein, low in calorie, high in fiber, low in carb. Go to Built.com today to get your hands on some of your own. Thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Just a reminder that we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. We are here talking Texas Tech spring football. Just broke down the quarterback position, and now I think another area on this offense that is very, very deep and where you may be at a win-win situation, even more so at this group than at quarterback, and that's with the running backs. You've got two guys back that have shown that they can be running back one at pretty much any Big 12 school. These are two very competent guys in SaRodorick Thompson and Taj Brooks. Thompson obviously led the team in rushing in 19 and 20, and then sat out a couple of games at the front end of the season. Taj Brooks emerged, and he looked like he was going to be a superstar. And then Brooks starts dealing with injuries. Thompson gets back into the primary ball rusher role, and he finishes the season with about 528 rushing yards. So, man, I don't even know if you can really make the distinction between running back one or two with these two guys, because I think both of them will carry the ball multiple times a game. I think that there will be a really good balance here. I mean, we're talking about a difference of 21 last season, and Thompson played in 2 more games than Brooks did. So, man, I think you've got to feel really good about the running back room. I know people are worried about Kitley's offense and if either of these guys will get enough snaps, but just looking at the personnel, you have to think that running back is a no doubt strength for Texas Tech in the spring.
Yeah, SaRodorick Thompson, first off, is one of the most experienced running backs you're going to find in the Big 12. I mean, this is a guy who at times throughout the last 3 seasons has been Tech's first running back and primary running back as well. And so he's had a lot of workload on his shoulders. He's had multiple games in the past where he's been the workhorse and been tasked with carrying the ball 25, 30 times. I mean, obviously dating back to 2019 when he was a redshirt freshman, he had games against teams like Baylor and Texas where he really looked the part. And again, with both him and Brooks, I think the health has been a little bit of a problem the last few years. And obviously Taj Brooks last year had the leg fracture that really kind of stunted his season. But with Thompson, you've got the experience. With Brooks, you've got the explosiveness. I mean, Brooks, those first couple of games against Houston, Stephen F. Austin was as electric as they came. And I think you saw it again down the stretch of the season, especially in the Liberty Bowl. You were able to really integrate Thompson and Brooks into the rotation, have a good balance between the two. And I think that that's something that you can really carry going forward, because I think both of them have their strengths. Obviously, Brooks is probably a little bit more of a straight line speed guy, a little bit more elusive, but he's also able to run with power the same way that Thompson does. Thompson obviously has that elusiveness. He's got the pure power behind him that I think is really interesting. And so you've got two kind of contrasting styles. You throw in a guy like Xavier White, who I'm not exactly sure how they're going to utilize him this year, but he's got a really unique skill set. I mean, your running back room is as strong as they come. I think Thompson and Brooks being your two leading guys is something that you have to be really comfortable with. And I think it's probably the best running back situation you've come into the season with in a while. And obviously you've had guys like Tajon Henry and SaRodorick Thompson coming into the season in 2019, where both of them were young and proven to a degree. And obviously you've had like DeAndre Washington coming back after a 1,000-yard season. But now you've got two guys that could feasibly hit 1,000 yards in a certain system if they were the lead guy. And I think to have that and to have that level of talent feels really nice.
Yeah, Xavier White has been moved back to H instead of running back. Obviously still a guy that could get some snaps from the backfield and would work really, really well, as it's been proven to. I think you're looking really good on the inside right now. You've got Miles Price obviously returning, the only guy in this receiving room that caught more than 20 passes last year that returns to Texas Tech. You've got Xavier White back, and then I think even Jadarius Townsend is going to play some receiving snaps this season, so that'll be interesting to monitor. But where I think you need a guy to step up is on the outside. You lose Eric Ezukama and Kalen Geiger, and those are two just absolute production machines for you, especially last season, combined for, goodness, almost 100 catches. So you're losing a ton of production there and a lot of veterans, and you've got a really, really good young core. But these guys are going to have to step up, specifically talking Trey Cleveland, Loic Fungi, and JJ Sparkman. You need one of those three guys to have a big, big jump, especially in the spring, summer, and as we head into the season, really. You need one of those three guys to step up if this Texas Tech offense is going to reach its full potential. That's kind of where I land on that right now.
Yeah, and you can add Jerome Bradley into that mix as well on the outside as sort of a quartet of young guys that really don't have a lot of experience, but all of them have made big plays at some point in their Tech career. Obviously, Bradley being kind of the most limited in terms of the snaps that he's gotten, but Sparkman obviously had the big bowl game. You had Fonji, who's kind of been in and out of getting some snaps over the last couple of years, and then Trey Cleveland has been a rotation piece for the last year as well. So you've got a good amount of talent on the outside. It's just sort of figuring out how they fit together and having, like you mentioned, having one guy maybe step up and sort of become the leader of that group. And I wouldn't rule out maybe having multiple guys as well. And one of the cool things about Zach Kelly's system is there's room to be able to really rotate those guys in and out. And so I don't think you're going to have a situation per se where if the talent is there, he's going to figure out ways to utilize them, whether that means maybe playing a good 10% of the snaps in the slot for one of those guys, like a Cleveland, for example, or if it means sort of just doing lots of rotation shifts. There's going to be the potential to have all of those guys getting good amounts of snaps over the course of the season. But on the outside, I think you have the real depth. On the inside, I look at it like Miles Price has got to be the guy. He's got to be the most established receiver in the room. He's obviously had big games in the last 2 years. I think maybe his sophomore year started out more slow than you would have anticipated, given that he had such a strong end to his freshman year. But certainly, I mean, he's got the talent in the slot to be a real weapon. And obviously, they've used him in jet sweeps. They've used him in a variety of things. I'm excited to see how Kitley sort of draws things up to really maximize Price's versatility. And then you're right on both Townsend and White. I'm interested to see how they get integrated. Obviously, both of them have been sort of dabbled around in the H position. I was looking at Xavier White's snap chart over last year, and despite the fact that he was listed as a running back, he did play a fair bit of snaps in the slot and in sort of an H-back position. So I'm interested to see just how that evolves. I have a hard time believing that he's going to play like purely in the slot, or obviously he's not going to be purely in the backfield. But I think sort of a hybrid of him and Townsend, both of them have good receiving skills. I think that's going to help to take some of the pressure off of playing Price, because I really think that your best offense comes with Miles Price playing a majority of the snaps on the slot. And so finding ways to sort of integrate those guys in as sort of that hybrid versatility role is going to be important. And so I think in general, you're in a good place with the receivers. Like, you have a lot of young talent. There's no one established guy. I mean, Miles Price is as close as you can come on that, but there's no guy like an Ezukama last year or like a Kiki QT coming in 2017, where it was like you knew he was going to be the number one guy. And I think that's a good thing, because it also allows you to sort of see that young talent, to look at the spring and to look at how the fall camps emerge and just see sort of how your receiving room opens up. Because I do think there's just enough young talent and enough, not experience per se, but with the youth, they're guys that have played some snaps. They all have sort of their feet wet at this point. So you're going to get good opportunities for those guys. And hopefully the offense can really sort of get their receiving room set up and in a good shape going into the fall.
We'll take a look at the defensive end of the football, because it's certainly one where Texas Tech will be looking to improve on, after a quick word from BetOnline. After months of playing, college basketball has determined the top teams for the Final Four and will determine this year's national champion this coming week. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. From all the latest odds, contests, and player performance props, BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting in your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Defensive end of the football, Tyree Wilson is back, and I could not be more excited about that. This is a defensive group that has taken a little bit of a hit in the linebacker position, obviously, losing guys like Schooler, Jeffers, Merriweather. I mean, you're losing a ton of talent, but now you've got Tyree Wilson on the edge, and I could not be more excited about him having an even more productive year in 2022.
This is a guy in Tyree Wilson that Tim DeRuyter, who, mind you, coached at Oregon last year, said today, well, Kayvon is a guy that has a similar skill set to Tyree. I think Tyree can have that kind of impact on our defense that KT did in our Oregon defense. And shout out to Red Raider Sports for the quote and the article. If you haven't checked that out, do so. But, I mean, the raw talent on this team and the raw talent with Tyree Wilson in particular is incredible. And do I expect him to have the pure impact that Thibodeau did? Maybe not, but certainly having the talent to be compared to a guy that's going to be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, it's pretty crazy. I mean, we saw what he did against Mississippi State. We've seen what he's done the last couple of years, and I think there's a strong case for him being one of the most talented pass rushers in the Big 12. And certainly having him back on the defensive line and really sort of playing an integral part of your pass rush, I think it's the single most important factor of this defense, because if Wilson has one of those really good seasons and takes the next step as a pass rusher and even as a run stopper as well, then that's huge, because getting pressure on the quarterback oftentimes makes the difference in these Big 12 games. And we've seen against Tech where having a singular guy that can really have those massive games and sort of disrupt the offense is huge. And so for Wilson to be able to take that next step, be the real leader of this defense, I'm really excited for his natural talent, and I'm hopefully he can stay healthy. Hopefully he can continue to take those steps, because man, the sky is the limit for him. He's really, really shown his talent the last couple of years.
He's a terrifying human being. Like, the way that he is built and the way that he plays football should not be allowed. Like, every time I'm watching him on the line, I just think about that Baylor guy and the picture taken at AT&T Stadium where he just looks like Megatron. Like, that's the only comparable guy to Tyree Wilson. I mean, we are talking about an athletic specimen, and it just feels like it's been a while, man, since Texas Tech had a truly elite edge rusher. Like, they've had some very serviceable guys over the years, but it's been a long time since they've had one that was truly elite. I mean, Eli Howard was good, but even then, the potential of Tyree Wilson, it blows his out of the water. I just don't think that we've really seen anything like Tyree Wilson in a really, really long time. And so I completely agree with you. I think that he's the catalyst for this defense and how they perform as a whole. Tim DeRuyter typically runs 3-man front. That's going to make a lot of Texas Tech fans really unhappy at the beginning of the season. But with the true pass rusher in Tyree Wilson, I think that it can really work. I really do. And I think that if you're able to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks, you're going to have the ability to cause some disruptions in the offense. So, I think it starts on the defensive line for Texas Tech, and it starts with Tyree Wilson. I think I had him and you had him or you definitely had him as your MVP last season. And that's not insane to think about. Like, he had 13.5 tackles for loss last season and 7 sacks. Like, it's been a long, long time since somebody put up those numbers in Lubbock. And I think you're going to need him to play his best football yet, especially with the hits that you are taking on the linebacker end. But there's another area of this defense that I'm really excited about, and it's the secondary, which feels like sacrilegious to say on a Texas Tech podcast that I am excited about the secondary. but it's true. And I can't help it, man. There are 3 guys in this secondary that, like, I think are all Big 12 good. Like, there are 3 studs here. I mean, we're talking about Dadrion Taylor-Demerson, who led the team in interceptions last year. Reggie Pearson, who is going to play primarily, disrupting the run game, but has shown that he can play in coverage. And then, of course, Muddy Waters, who is getting kind of buried in the reporting this offseason and throughout this season because he was hurt last year, but was like a star at Duke. And you're looking at 3 guys that are just really high caliber defensive backs. And so while I'm excited about Tyree Wilson, this group, man, it feels like the upside is tremendous.
Yeah. I mean, you look at those 3 guys and you have just so many differing skill sets there. I mean, obviously, Muddy Waters comes from a Duke program where he really was the catalyst for that defense in the secondary for multiple years and had a massive impact on them. I mean, he's the guy that came into Tech with a boatload of snaps. And obviously last year's season was cut short due to injury. And obviously there were a lot of questions in the secondary after that. But certainly, I mean, he's got the experience. He's got the versatility as a safety. I think his coverage is probably superior to what you would say Reggie Pearson has. And certainly Pearson is a guy coming from Wisconsin, another program well known for their defense. And his sort of specialty was on the run stuffing side of things. And he's a real hard hitting safety. Obviously, last year the coverage was a little bit questionable at times, and he got banged up a bit later on in the season. But he's a guy that can really sort of be a good run stopper for you. And I think that his talent level there is going to be a big time addition. Then you've obviously got Dadrion Taylor-Demerson, who really came on down the stretch of last year after Muddy Waters went down. And it's going to be interesting to see how sort of the staff decides to utilize both of them together, because I think there's room to sort of maybe rotate them around, whether it be putting Taylor-Demerson in the slot or something of that nature, or as the nickel corner. But certainly you have those opportunities there to sort of utilize all 3 of those guys. And then beyond that, I mean, you've got a decent amount of depth in the secondary. I mean, obviously it's not going to be the most deep secondary. You lose DeMarcus Fields from last year, but you bring back a guy like Adrian Fry. You also have just a lot of talent in guys like Malik Dunlap, who obviously came in from NC State. And then you also have sort of Rashad Williams as well, who played a lot of snaps last year as the corner opposite to DeMarcus Fields. And I think just having all of those guys with D1 experience with a lot of high major snaps is going to be a nice benefit to have in the secondary. And you have a real versatile amount of skill sets. You've got guys that are more on the run stopping side of things. You've got pure man-to-man corners. Someone like Williams kind of comes to mind there. And then you've got sort of hybrid players like a Taylor Demerson or like a like a Muddy Waters that can really sort of play in a variety of different capacities. So it's a good position to be in your secondary. I mean, it's still not something I would consider to be completely settled. I mean, at the end of the day, this was still a secondary that struggled a lot at times against the pass last year. But to come into a season with a secondary full of guys with good amounts of D1 experience is really nice. It's a nice change to have from years past.
Linebacker has been a group that has been an unusual strength for Texas Tech in recent years, and now it becomes an unusual liability. I believe I misspoke earlier and said that Krishan Merriweather was no longer on the roster, but he is. He's playing linebacker for Texas Tech once again this season. But outside of him, there's not a lot of names here that Texas Tech fans will be super familiar with, and that's not a mistake. I mean, there just are not a guys that have. There's not a lot of guys that have played minutes for Texas Tech at the linebacker position that are still on this roster, and so Texas Tech is going to need some production out of the transfers that they got. They got a couple this offseason, specifically Dimitri Moore, who I've heard good things about coming out of spring practices. Jacob Rodriguez out of Virginia, and then Kosi Eldridge, a junior college transfer. Those 3 guys are going to be really, really important to watch, specifically Moore, because I think he's the one in the position to kind of earn the most snaps. But linebacker is looking a little dicey right now.
Yeah, there's really not a whole lot of name recognition on this roster. I mean, obviously you've got Moore, who was probably your most coveted defensive transfer coming into the year. And I mean, certainly he's got a lot of talent as a linebacker. I'm excited to see how he performs in the spring and just sort of see how that evolves. I mean, obviously we're really operating on sort of limited notes so far from everyone being together, so it's hard to really get a good form of where this core stands, and it could evolve. I mean, obviously we've had times in the past where we weren't sure of where you guys are going to fit in. I think back to 2020 before Colin Schooler showed up from Arizona, there was a lot of question marks about the rest of the linebacking corps, and just because you had all the transfers like Brandon Boyer-Randall, like Krishan Merriweather, and didn't know how they were going to fit in after the absence of Jordan Brooks, and it worked out all right in that season. So I'm not saying that's not going to happen this year, but certainly, I mean, it looks pretty thin on paper. I mean, Eldridge is a guy that is intriguing because of his versatility. You can use him some as a pass rusher. And then obviously you've got Tyreek Matthews, who's been good on special teams the last couple of years. By all accounts, seems like he might be back into the rotation as an actual defensive player more this year. I mean, there's talent there. There's guys that we've seen play at various levels and get some snaps, but from going to maybe your biggest strength last year in the linebacking core to now being one of your weakest points, at least coming into the spring, doesn't feel great. It's a little bit sketchy, but we'll see. I mean, there's still a decent amount of talent in the position group, and hopefully it works out. And I think that we're still a long way away from the season starts. You never know who's going to stand out in spring and how we're going to see those positions evolve.
Yeah, I think that's really the group to watch this spring. And as the offseason continues, I think, with that receiving room, you're looking for one of that quartet to step up. But those guys have performed at Texas Tech, maybe not at a high rate, but they've shown that they can do that with this linebacker group. I think you're really, really looking for somebody to step up here. And so I think that'll be one of the things to watch for in Saturday scrimmage. If you are there, I hope that you enjoy it. Weather is supposed to be beautiful in Lubbock this weekend, which is great because it has been horrible this week, and there are some big names in Lubbock for visits. So that'll be big to soak up the good weather and some good football, and hopefully Texas Tech won't find a way to lose a scrimmage. But yeah, it feels good to be talking about football again. I'm itching to talk about Nigel Pack, but maybe we'll be back next week sharing some news about him. In the meantime, thank you for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Keep up with us on Twitter throughout the weekend. You can follow me at rmainvillelbk. You can follow Emery at eraser41, and you can follow the official Locked On Texas Tech Twitter page at Locked On TTU. Be sure that you are subscribed to our YouTube channel and follow our feed wherever you get podcasts. In the meantime, thanks for making Locked On Texas Tech your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts, almost at platforms. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you on